Good morning, everyone. Interesting talk, Terry. I think hopefully what I'm going to talk about sort of gets at one small part of your model, I hope. So I'm presenting the results of a study that we've recently completed into people's motivation or willingness to engage in trapping possums in urban Dunedin. The study is part of a program of social research into predator control at Manaaki Whenua. And our research team consists of Robin Kannemeyer, Dean Strong, Nick Kirk, Ben Wazinski, and me. The research is supported partly by Predator Free 2050 and partly by the Wildlife and Ecology Management portfolio at Manaaki Whenua. What I'll do is give a very, very brief background and a little bit of a look at some theory, and mostly I'll just concentrate on giving some results. Okay, I guess most people know about the aim of Predator Free 2050 is to eliminate, well, one of the aims of Predator Free 2050 is to eliminate brush-tailed possums from New Zealand by 2050. In principle, people in urban areas can contribute to that objective by trapping brush-tailed possums in their gardens. That kind of work sort of kicked off a bit in Wellington already on the Miramar Peninsula. Down in Dunedin, they have a possum trapping program that runs on the Otago Peninsula and what's called the Halo. So they're on the edge of the city. And now they're wanting to engage citizens or residents in Dunedin in a trapping program over the next 5 years, kicking off this year, hopefully. So Predator Free Dunedin's pretty interested in knowing how willing people are to engage in trapping of possums and their attitudes towards it. So our approach to this was built on the idea of, or the concept of involvement, which is a measure from marketing, a concept from marketing. It's built on social psychology. And involvement is a measure of a person's motivation, willingness to invest time and energy in something, in some kind of subject. The sources of involvement are utilitarian, so that's things like security, safety, comfort. Social, which is self-expression and self-identity. Hedonic, which is experiential, so enjoying doing something. Involvement is intensified when there's uncertainty about the consequences for achieving a goal. So that's, if you think, basically, it's around whether you think there's the possibility, a high chance of making a mistake with respect to the subject of interest, and if how serious the consequences are of making a mistake. So you could imagine, for example, with farmers, going back to the example Terry was talking about, farming is highly involving for farmers. It's functional, it's their livelihood, it's social, it gives them expression, self-expression and identity. It's a source of hedonic involvement because of the enjoyment they get from it, the reward. There are high risks associated with making a mistake in farming because the systems are complex, and the potential for getting it wrong is pretty serious because you can lose your livelihood and your family. Okay, so here's an example of high involvement. You could think of it as being passionate about something, really caring about something. So the dude here in the crocheted yellow outfit is highly involved with crocheting. High involvement is linked to complex decision making. It's linked to extensive search for information about the subject. People devote time and effort to that search and to the subject itself. They develop strong beliefs and attitudes that are resistant to change with regard to the subject. And they are scanning the environment fairly regularly for new information and messaging about the subject. At the other end of the scale, you have low involvement, personified by our security guard here. Low involvement is associated with simple decision-making heuristics. If something is low involving, it has low involvement, then people spend little, if any time at all, gathering information about the subject. They have weak beliefs, if any, and weak attitudes, if any, towards the subject. And these beliefs and attitudes can be easily changed. They are unstable. They will ignore messaging and promotion from the environment about the subject. They just don't care, and so are completely unaware of what's going on most of the time. So what we proposed was that you could try to predict people's responses to a policy initiative on the basis of three things. One's their level of involvement with the policy outcome. So in this case, it was reducing possums. The second thing was their involvement with the policy initiative itself. In this case, it's the provision of traps or trapping possums, and their attitude towards the initiative. Do they think that the initiative is a good or a bad thing? Given those three things, we can summarise or make predictions about people's responses to an initiative or a policy measure using these quadrants. So this figure, the vertical axis measures involvement with the outcome. So that's how much you care about or you're passionate about reducing possum numbers. The horizontal axis is involvement with the initiative, trapping possums. I'll focus primarily on quadrants 1, so the bottom left, and quadrants 3, the top right, mainly for interests of time and because the results I'll be presenting concern those two quadrants. If we look at quadrant 1, these are people that have low involvement with the outcome and low involvement with the initiative. So basically, these are people that just simply don't care about reducing possum numbers, and they don't care about trapping possums. There's basically two ways you might get these people to do something. One is to make trapping inexpensive and convenient, easy, or do it for them, basically. That's the most convenient thing. Or you can link it to an involving outcome, so you make it important to them, personally important. For example, by putting out the message that possums pose disease risks for children. Because for most parents, kids, the health of and safety of their kids is highly involving. So they're the two fundamental ways of trying to get people in that bottom left quadrant, quadrant 1, to do something.
In minutes.
Thanks, Phil. The opposite to them are people in the top right quadrant, quadrant 3. These people are highly involved with the outcome, so they really care about reducing possum numbers, and they're highly involved with the initiative, so they really care about trapping. There's two possibilities here. These people may have a favourable attitude towards trapping, which means they will be your advocates and they will do what you want. Okay. They may well be doing what you want anyway, irrespective of any program you put in place. The other box is people that are highly involved, so they care about getting rid of possums, but they have an unfavourable attitude towards trapping. So basically, these people believe your heart's in the right place, that getting rid of possums is a good idea. They just think trapping is a bad way to go about it. There's a couple of things you can do with these people. One is to force them to do what you want, because they will do it if forced, because it's to achieve an outcome that they think is valuable. An alternative is to incorporate the ways they think it should be done into your initiative. So you bring them inside the tent. Okay, so we applied this model by surveying 400 householders in Dunedin. They're a mix of internet panelists, and we also did some telephone interviewing as well, primarily to get a good gender balance. The internet panelists tended to be more women than men. We measured involvement with the idea of reducing possum numbers and involvement with trapping. We measured attitude towards the idea of trapping possums, and we measured attitude strength. And we also looked at beliefs about the advantages and disadvantages of reducing possums and trapping possums. And we also looked into people's sense of responsibility for reducing possum numbers. This is what a map actually looks like. On the vertical axis, we have involvement with reducing possum numbers. The horizontal axis is involvement with trapping possums. And the red dot is a household. Each red dot is a household. The minimum level of involvement, low involvement or zero involvement, is 1, and the maximum was 5 using our scale. And what we can see is that most people are mildly to moderately involved, so between 2.5 and 4.5, and the majority of people are in the top right quadrant. So most of the residents in our sample were moderately involved with reducing possum numbers and trapping possums. So that's good news for predator-free Dunedin, because it means the majority of people have some level of engagement with these ideas. In this graph, I've graphed the source of involvement. As I said, the minimum is 1, the maximum is 5. Really, the main thing we're interested in here is comparing the blue line, which is the quadrant 1s, the low involved types, with the black line, the highly involved. And the main thing to note here is the highly involved are involved across all aspects of all sources of involvement: functional, experiential, identity, consequence, and risk. Whereas the low involvement types have some degree of involvement, mostly around consequence and risk. So, yeah.
15, Geoff.
Thanks, mate. This graph shows their beliefs about what will happen, or belief statements regarding reducing possum numbers. Again, we want to focus on the blue and the black. The main thing here is that maximum agreement levels are 5 and the minimum is 1, and 3 is unsure. And nicely enough, our low involvement people, the blue line, are unsure about nearly everything, whereas the high involvement people have definite opinions. They were definitely for or against particular beliefs about the advantages or disadvantages of possums. So the black line is high or low, not sitting in the middle. One thing we did ask people what they were doing was whether or not they actually trapped possums presently. And in line with theory, we had a much higher proportion of people in quadrant 3, the highly involved, trapping possums currently than in the other quadrants. We also ask people about their sense of responsibility. And on a scale of 1 to 5, what we get is people in quadrant 3, the black line, expressed a higher sense of responsibility in terms of that trapping possums was the right thing to do, that they felt some responsibility for doing it, they're prepared to take action, and they're prepared to make sacrifices, compared to people in quadrant 1, the blue line, the low involved. So everything's basically fairly consistent with our theory. Again, this is involvement across the different sources, and the same sort of result as before. The highly involved in quadrant 3 tend to be involved on all aspects of involvement, whereas the low involvement are only concerned about consequence and risk. This is beliefs about trapping. And the main thing to note here is that those in quadrant 1, the blue line, were unsure, they were ambivalent about trapping. They weren't convinced that trapping wasn't a risk to health, a danger to children, bad for native birds, cruel and inhumane, and a danger to pets. Whereas people in quadrant 3 disagreed with those statements.
2 minutes to finish.
Okay, mate. The main thing in this one is this is intensity of involvement, and the main thing is people in quadrant 1, over 50% thought that trapping didn't matter to them, they weren't sure about it, and they hadn't given it much thought, compared to quadrant 3, where 72% either thought trapping was the right thing to do or a bad thing to do. This is the final result, summarising everything, and the main thing here is that most people, so the size of the circle is equivalent to the percentage of respondents. Nearly 70% are in quadrant 3 and either favour trapping or are ambivalent about it. What all this means is there's widespread support for urban trapping in Dunedin. The support's motivated by concerns for the environment, damage to property and personal family health. While residents will support a program, their moderate involvement suggests they will only join if it's easy and inexpensive and they can believe they can make a difference. Thanks.